I'm sorry, I don't know Tamil, but I'm going to try and make do with English. And I'm hoping Rajesh will do the needful. I'm actually really overwhelmed by the sheer turnout here. If you have a book release function in Delhi, the chances of getting 300-400 people are zero. I mean, you would have to give very good whiskey, Scotch whiskey, not IMFL, and you would have to give chicken tikkas, and then there's a chance that about 40 to 50 people might show up.
எனக்கு தமிழ் தெரியாது, இங்கிலீஷ்ல தான் பேச போறேன். இருந்தாலும் சில வார்த்தைகள் சொல்றேன். இங்க வந்திருக்கிற கூட்டத்தை நினைச்சா எனக்கு ரொம்ப பெருமையா இருக்கு. அதாவது என்னால நம்ப முடியல. காரணம் டெல்லியில வந்து இப்படி ஒரு கூட்டம் வச்சா ஒரு 200-300 பேர் தான் வருவாங்க. அதுவும் அங்க நல்ல ஸ்காட்ச் கிடைக்கும் அப்படின்னா கண்டிப்பா ஒரு நல்ல கூட்டம் வரும்.
Is there a scotch after this? Is that what somebody said?
இது ஒரு ஸ்காட்ச் இருக்கா?
I read Zero Degree by chance some 2 years ago. I was on the jury of an international writers award. There were 6 international writers who were jurors on this award, and each of us had the right to pick 2 books and nominate 2 books for this award. It was a big award. The award was worth 40 lakh rupees, and I did not want to nominate any Indian writer in English because I don't think too much of Indian writers in English.
ஜீரோ டிகிரி சில வருடங்களுக்கு முன்னால் படிக்க நேர்ந்தது. அது ஒரு இன்டர்நேஷனல் அவார்டுக்கான ஒரு ஃபங்க்ஷன். அங்கே 6 எழுத்தாளர்கள் இருந்தோம், 6 இன்டர்நேஷனல் எழுத்தாளர்கள் இருந்தோம். ஒவ்வொரு எழுத்தாளரும் வந்து 2 நாவல் வந்து பரிந்துரைக்கணும். என்னோட முறை வந்தப்போ இந்திய எழுத்தாளர்கள் யாரையுமே என்ன பரிந்துரைக்க வேண்டாம் என்று நினைத்தேன்.
So I started reading Indian writers in translation, other language writers, and I read all the books that were available in English, and I ended up choosing 2 books from Indian writers from the languages, which I nominated for this award, which was based in Geneva. And one of those 2 books, one was Uday Prakash's The Walls of Delhi, written in Hindi, and the second book that I picked was Charu Nivedita's Zero Degree.
இருந்தாலும் அப்படிப்பட்ட மொழிபெயர்ப்புகளை நான் படிக்க நேர்ந்த போது 2 புத்தகங்கள் எனக்கு ரொம்ப பிடிச்சது. ஒன்று உதய பிரகாஷோடது வால்ஸ் ஆஃப் டெல்லி, இன்னொன்று சாரு நிவேதிதாவின் ஜீரோ டிகிரி.
What I found in the book was what I look for in good books, in great books, in good writers, in great writers, which is first of all an ability to challenge the reader and to demand more out of the reader.
நல்ல புத்தகங்களோட ஒரு சிறந்த குணம் என்னன்னா படிக்கிறவனை சேலஞ்ச் பண்ணணும். அவங்ககிட்ட இருந்து சில நல்ல விஷயங்கள் கொண்டு வரணும். அந்த புக்கு படிக்கும் போதே அவனுக்கு வந்து சில விஷயங்கள் தோணணும். அதை எடுத்துட்டு வெளியில கொண்டு வரக்கூடிய திறமை.
Let me tell you a story. About 4 years ago, I was in Paris for the release of my second novel, The Story of My Assassins.
பாரிஸ்ல 4 வருஷம் முன்னாடி என்னோட ஸ்டோரி ஆஃப் மை அசாசின்ஸ் புத்தகங்களுக்காக நான் அங்க இருக்க நேர்ந்தது.
The biggest bookshop in Paris is the Fnac bookshop, and I was doing an event like this there, and somebody got up from the audience, a young woman got up from the audience, and she said, Mr. Tejpal, I just loved your first book, The Alchemy of Desire, but I just want to say that your second book has disturbed me so much I can't sleep at night.
Okay, அங்கிருந்த ஒரு சிறந்த புத்தக கடை, ஃபினாக் புத்தக கடை, அங்கு இந்த மாதிரி ஒரு கூட்டத்தில் இருக்கும்போது ஒரு இளம் பெண் என்னிடம் ஒரு கேள்வி எழுப்பினாங்க. உங்களோட 2வது புத்தகம் எனக்கு ரொம்ப பிடிச்சது, இருந்தாலும் முதல் புத்தகம் என்னை மிகவும் பாதித்து விட்டது, அதிலிருந்து என்னால் எழ முடியவில்லை.
I said,
I'm sorry. ஒரு சின்ன தவறு நிகழ்ந்து விட்டது. ஓகே, என்னோட 2வது புத்தகம் இல்ல முதல் புத்தகம், அதுதான் ஒரு சிறிய தப்பு.
We don't need the translation, you can get it. so okay, no, that is good. Carry on. So what I said to this young lady was, I said, I'm delighted. If my book is keeping you awake at night, I'm delighted. Because I do not write books to amuse you or please you.
எனக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷம். என் புத்தகம் வந்து உங்களை பாதித்ததுனால எனக்கு ரொம்ப சந்தோஷம். ஏன்னா உங்களை வந்து என்னோட புத்தகம் எழுத முதல் காரணம் நான் உங்களை அம்யூஸ் பண்றதுக்காக இல்லை.
You know, the problem is we live in an age of amusement, in an age of entertainment, and in this age everything that we have around us is actually constructed to merely entertain us or amuse us.
நாம வாழ்ற ஒரு யுகம் வந்து பொதுவா எல்லாரையுமே அம்யூஸ் பண்ற ஒரு யுகம். இங்கே நம்ம சுத்தி இருக்கிற எல்லாரையுமே அம்யூஸ் பண்றதுக்காக கட்டமைக்கப்பட்டது. அப்படிப்பட்ட ஒரு யுகம் தான் இது.
Television, cinema, even the newspapers, everything that you see around you is actually just aimed at amusing you and pleasing you.
டெலிவிஷன், சினிமா, செய்தித்தாள்கள் எல்லாமே உங்களை வந்து கவரவும், உங்களை ப்ளீஸ் செய்யவும், அம்யூஸ் செய்யவுமே உருவாக்கப்பட்டவை.
In such an age, the job of literature, the task of literature becomes even more important and even more serious.
இத்தகைய ஒரு யுகத்தில் இலக்கியத்தின் பணி வந்து ரொம்ப ரொம்ப தீவிரமானது.
And in my opinion, the job of literature is actually to discomfort you, is to create great disturbance and unease in you.
ஓகே, இத்தகைய ஒரு நேரத்தில் இலக்கியத்தின் பணின்னு நான் என்ன நினைக்கிறேன்னா, ஒரு மிகப்பெரிய ஒரு டிஸ்கம்ஃபர்ட், உங்களை வந்து நிலைக்குலைய செய்ய வேண்டும் இலக்கியம். அதுதான் அதோட பணி என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன்.
And so I feel that when I heard all the things that were being said about Charu's writing as they were being translated by Sanjana, and from my own reading of Zero Degree, I feel he is the kind of writer who wants to challenge his readers, and he wants to discomfort his readers, and he does not want his readers to live in a life of complacency.
இன்று சாருவை பற்றி எல்லாரும் பேசுறதை நான் கேட்டப்போ, சாரு வந்து அத்தகைய ஒரு எழுத்தாளர், படிப்பவர்களை சேலஞ்ச் பண்ணக்கூடிய ஒரு எழுத்தாளர், படிப்பவர்களை நிலைக்குலை செய்யக்கூடிய ஒரு எழுத்தாளர் என்று நான் புரிந்து கொண்டேன்.
You know, one of the things I keep saying all the time when I speak to people, especially in colleges and other places, is that we must be very, very cautious about what we are told about the virtues of simplicity. I believe in complexity.
நான் காலேஜில் பல இடங்கள் பேசும்போது நான் சொல்றது ஒன்று, எளிமைகளின் விச்சூகள் அதை வந்து நான் வந்து நம்புவது இல்லை. நான் வந்து ஒரு சிக்கல், ஒரு காம்ப்ளெக்சிட்டியை தான் நான் கூற விரும்புகிறேன்.
The truth is, human beings are extremely complex animals, and we live extremely complex lives. And it's almost necessary that we learn to embrace complexity. And one of the great virtues of the Indian civilization for 5,000 years is that the Indian civilization has always embraced complexity.
ஓகே, மனிதர்கள் பற்றிய பொதுவான இது மனித வாழ்க்கையை பற்றியும் மனிதர்களை பற்றியும் என்னன்னா, அவங்க புரிந்து கொள்ள கடினமானவர்கள், அவங்க வாழ்க்கையும் அப்படித்தான், ஒரு காம்ப்ளெக்ஸான வாழ்க்கை. 5000 வருட இந்திய வரலாற்றில் அப்படிப்பட்ட ஒரு உண்மையை வெளியே வருகிறது. அது ஒரு காம்ப்ளெக்ஸான வாழ்க்கை தான், புரிந்து கொள்ள கடினமான வாழ்க்கை.
For me, simplicity is dangerous. The lack of doubt is dangerous. Easy faith, unquestioning faith is dangerous.
எளிமையானது மிகவும் ஆபத்தானது என்று நான் நினைக்கிறேன். ஒரு நம்பிக்கையை கேள்வி கேட்கக்கூடிய அளவு ஒரு எளிமை, அது வந்து மிகவும் ஆபத்தானது. Okay.
Whether you step down, we understand.
Okay.
பலமா என்கிட்ட இல்லை. வேணா கேட்க நான் ஒரு சின்ன ரெக்வஸ்ட், நீங்க கொஞ்சம் நல்லா பண்ணுவீங்கன்னா மேடைக்கு எல்லாருக்கும் உபயோகமா இருக்கும். Please.
All I'm saying is that someone like me is deeply distrustful of simplicity, because I'll tell you, the road of simplicity, it finally ends up in jihadis, because that is the simple view of the world. And we should always be a little scared of simplicity and willing to embrace complexity.
நாம எப்போதுமே வந்து சிம்பிள்னு நினைக்கிற ஒரு சராசரி கணக்கு தான் நம்ம எப்போதுமே ஜாக்கிரதையா இருக்கணும். ஏன்னா நமக்கு வந்து எப்பொழுதுமே சிக்கல்கள்ல தான் உண்மை இருக்கு. நம்ம சிம்பிளிசிட்டியை பார்த்தா ரொம்ப அஞ்சம்.
You know, I mean, the person who introduced me spoke to you about Tehelka and its work against corruption. But far more important than Tehelka's work against corruption has been Tehelka's journalism against communalism.
நம்ம தெஹல்காவை பத்தி எப்பொழுதுமே ஊழலுக்கு எதிரானது அப்படின்னு தான் நினைச்சிட்டு இருக்கோம். ஆனா தெஹல்கா எப்பொழுதுமே வந்து கம்யூனலிசம் என்று சொல்லப்பட்ட இனச்சிக்கல்களுக்கு எதிராக தான் இருந்திருக்கு.
I personally believe that the greatest danger to India's future is not corruption but communalism.
இந்தியாவுக்கு இருக்கிற மிகப்பெரிய ஆபத்து என்பது ஊழலில் மட்டும் இல்லை, ஊழலிலும் இல்லை, முக்கியமாக இனச்சிக்கல்கள், அது சார்ந்த இன வேறுபாடுகள், அது சார்ந்த இன கலவரங்கள், இதுல தான் இருக்கு. ஆமா ஆமா அவர் சொல்ல நினைச்சது அதான் கம்யூனலிசம்ன்றது கொஞ்சம் காம்ப்ரிஹென்சிவா நான் சொல்றேன்.
அடுத்தது யாராவது வரலாம், கொஞ்சம் அட்ஜஸ்ட் பண்ணிட்டு இருக்காங்க. இதை வந்து நம்ம
I'm not only born a Hindu, I come from a Brahmin family. But I treat myself as an agnostic. I've always said, philosophically, I'm a Hindu. Alright? I do not believe in maybe I do not believe in the religious practices. My mother was very religious, maybe I'm not. But I think we are all inheritors of the greatest body of ancient thought. I mean, our civilizational riches are without parallel in the world. And I think anything that reduces us from that greatness of Vedanta is very, very problematic. I have a problem with a narrow interpretation of Hinduism because I believe that Hindu thought, Hindu philosophical thought, is the single greatest body of philosophical thought in the world. And unlike many people, I have read Hinduism, I'm willing to argue about Hinduism with other people, and I believe, Hinduism has many schools of thought which believed in atheism. So this is the liberal, all-encompassing, curious nature of Hinduism. Hinduism was great because the people who were the thinkers believed in raising the right questions. And even our great epics, for example, I believe that the greatest novel ever written in the history of the world is the Mahabharata. It's the greatest novel written. For its plot, for its cast of characters, for its moral and ethical dilemmas, it is the greatest novel written. And it could be written largely because as a culture, as a civilization, we believed in an open society, in open thinking. And I think that is what we have to try and preserve. And I think we are coming into a very difficult time in this country's history where a lot of us who believe that India needs to be a very, very culturally open nation, we will have to stand up and make ourselves heard. And I think in this, writers like Charu, like many others sitting here, have a great role to play, because finally, writers are in a sense the conscience of a race, of any race. And a society that starts to neglect its writers, a society that stops to listen to its writers, is a society that is going to end up in deep trouble. I don't want to say that much more. I mean, there's been a lot of talk about women and sexuality. I heard that. For me, both things are very, very central to life and to civilizations. And this business of trying to shut out sexuality is a dangerous business. Our ancient culture embraces sexuality exactly as it embraces all other aspects of life. And there is great text after great text in which the sages have understood it. I mean, we have very clearly defined various parts of a man's life, and sexuality has been given a central role in that. But for the last few hundred years, because of a lot of hypocrisy, because of a lot of other influences, we have become very repressive in our approach to sexuality. Anybody who has lived a full life knows that sexuality is very central to his or her life. And it is a writer's job to make it something that we can look at without fear, without anxiety, without being embarrassed. And I think if Charu is doing that, I applaud him for that. As far as women is concerned, let me tell you, I personally believe, I have two daughters, and the older one is 27, the younger is 24. And so I live with 3 women in my house, my wife and 2 daughters. And I can tell you, having seen them and all their companions for the last 27 years, that men have no future. That the future belongs totally to women. And I tell you, in 200 years from now, women will keep men in cages and use them once in a while, but the future belongs to women. I mean, I can tell you that. As I said, I've seen my daughters grow up, and I can tell you the future really belongs to women. So I think both these things, the central activity of trying to address women's issues in writing, the central activity of trying to address sexual issues is perfectly kosher. But as important for a serious writer is the issue of power. I think all important writers, all great writers, in their writing try to address the issue of power. And when I say power, I don't mean it in a narrow sense. I don't mean it in ways of who wins elections or loses elections. I mean it in a very deep sense because power shapes societies. Who has power? Who wields power? What are the ideas that underpin power will shape the lives of hundreds of millions of people in this country. And it is a writer's job to actually analyze, diagnose and criticize power. This is the job. Our job is not to suck up to power, not to pay obeisance to power. Our job is to criticize. You know, when I wrote my second novel, there were people who would say to me, you are so rough. You're so rough on India. And every time somebody would tell me that, I would say, you must be joking. My book is a love song to India. If I criticize this country, I criticize myself. And it's a job of a writer to criticize what he loves the most. And because what you love the most is what you want to rise to the highest possible standards. And when I criticize my country as a journalist or as a writer, it's a cry of pain. I say it very simply to people who, all around the world, when they used to talk about India shining, I used to be in auditoriums like this saying, what is this nonsense about India shining? I used to tell people, please come to my city, Delhi. And on every traffic light, you will see children 3 years old, 4 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old, girls and boys begging for a single rupee. Which country has this absurd fantasy that it is a superpower, that it is a truly great country if it can't feed its children, it can't clothe its children, it can't send its children to school? So this kind of nonsensical talk I have a real problem with. I believe we are the legatees of a great civilization, but at this moment in time, we are not a great civilization. At this moment in time, we are a very, very shallow country. And I'll tell you something, if we remain so shallow, we will be in great trouble. We need to be able to look around us. We need to be able to see what is happening around us. We need to develop more compassion. I was in jail on a case, on a charge for almost 5.5 months. And being in there was an eye-opener. As a writer and a journalist, I'm grateful for that experience. The truth of what my case is will come out in the next few months and you will all know what the truth was. But for myself, as a writer and a journalist, it was an incredible experience. And one day, a retired judge came to the jail and he was talking to me because they would all come to talk to me. And he was talking to me and I asked the judge something very simple. I said, Judge, in my cell, there are 2 boys. One is 24.5 years old, the other is 25.5 years old. One has been in jail for 4.5 years, the other has been in jail for 5.5 years. One is in a case of theft. 4 boys had stolen some goods and he had been in jail for 5.5 years. The total value of what the 4 boys had stolen was 9 lakh rupees. I asked the judge, I said, what did he steal, Judge? Did he steal the Kohinoor diamond that had taken away 5.5 years of his life? Do you know the poverty the boy comes from? I said, do you not often think that it's a miracle that there is not 1 million thefts every day in this country given the inequalities? The judge had nothing to say to me. I told the judge, I said, Judge, tell me, this is a country born out of the dreams of a man called Mahatma Gandhi. How is it that this country has no compassion? How is it that judges sit in courts and refuse to give bail to boys on their first offense who have been in jail for 2, 3, 4, 5 years? And let me tell you what the coda to that story is. That same boy who was in prison for 5.5 years when I was there, 2 weeks ago, he was acquitted after serving 6 years in prison. He was acquitted. Who will give him back his 6 years of his life? I mean, this is the kind of country we are. There is vast injustice. And the job of writers and journalists in this country is huge. It's a shame. It's a huge shame that none of us do our jobs. Either as journalists or as writers. It's a country of great inequality. Let me give you a simple statistic. Do you know how many children in India die before the age of 5 years? What is the percentage of young children, infants, who die before the age of 5 years? I'll give you the statistic for China. In China, it's 6%. 6% of the children die before the age of 5. What do you think the number is for India? Take a guess, I'm sure. Somebody here must be doing sociology or... it's 46%. 46%. This is a country where 46% of the children die before 5 because of disease and malnutrition. And No, it's not die, it's how many have malnutrition under the age of 5, severe malnutrition. I'm saying this, and you know what severe malnutrition means? Means you're intellectually stunted, you're physically stunted, and you're emotionally stunted. So 1 out of 2 children in India suffers from acute malnutrition. And here we have all this nonsensical talk going on in Delhi all the time, all how we are a great superpower, how the stock market is booming. How many people are affected by the stock market? 1 million. Out of how many people? 1,260 million. And we think the stock market boom is an indicator of our well-being. The job of bringing these things to the people, the job of bringing these things to power, of speaking truth to power, is the job of writers. So there are many levels at which writers have to speak. They have to speak in societal ways, to demand truth out of society, to make sure that society sheds its hypocrisy, as importantly, to ensure that society develops a degree of compassion for the have-nots. Let us be clear about one thing. We are a very poor country. And if we are a poor country, our priorities have to be different. The priorities of India cannot be the priorities of Sweden or America, or Germany or Switzerland. The priorities of America have to be our own priorities. And let me tell you something, and the problem is we don't read too much, the young don't read enough. The founding fathers of India, from 1947 to 1960, I would say, they have done so much incredible work to create an equal society that we should be grateful. The only thing that distinguishes modern India, the India that we inhabit today, from all other countries in the world, especially the post-colonial world, is the quality of our founding fathers. The generation of Gandhi and Nehru, I'll tell you, they are the ones who have made it possible for even a man like Modi, coming from very humble origins, to become the Prime Minister of India. They created a society where opportunity became possible. And we were not like that. When we became independent in 1947, I'll give you a few quick statistics. When we became independent in 1947, our life expectancy was 26.5 years. That was the life expectancy of Indians. The illiteracy was 90%. There was no manufacturing. For 50 years, the rate of growth of GDP in India had been 1% a year. There were many years where it was 0% because the Britishers were pulling out everything from India and taking it back to England. We were so poor. Despite being so poor, despite being illiterate, what did the founding fathers do? Overnight, they made us into a modern, liberal democracy. I tell you that the Indian freedom struggle, the formation of modern India, is the single greatest act of mass genius in the last 1,000 years of the world. To take a poor country, to take a despicably poor country, a despicably illiterate country, a country with no manufacturing, no industry, nothing, and to overnight cast it into modernity, is the greatest act of audacity and imagination. We became, on day one, the founding fathers declared that every person, rich or poor, literate or illiterate, woman or man, would have the same vote. Universal adult franchise. It changed everything. And the change is what we see today across the country. That one act. The second great act they did, which Pakistan never did, was they brought in land reforms. Pakistan never did it. Most of the post-colonial world never did it. But in India we did it. We broke down the feudal system, we broke down the zamindari system, and we made it possible for peasants and the poor to start acquiring and owning land. So it's been a great story. Our story is a great story. It's a story of great odds. But while I tell you that, before that, I'll give you a quick statistic before I leave. In CE 0, Common Era 0, that's what we used to earlier call AD. In 0 year, that's 2000 years ago, the top 2 GDPs in the world, number 1 was India, number 2 was China. In 500 CE, that's in the Gupta period, the top 2 GDPs of the world, number 1 was India, number 2 was China. In 1000 CE, the time when the first invaders, Mahmud of Ghaznavi and Muhammad Ghori began to invade India, the top 2 GDPs in the world were number 1 India, number 2 China. In 1700, when Britishers first began to come into India and the Mughals were beginning to decline, Aurangzeb was about to die, in 1700, the top 2 GDPs of the world were still number 1 India, number 2 China. In 1820s, the top 2 GDPs of the world were China number 1, India number 2. In 60 years of British rule, we had already slipped to number 2. By the time the British left India, when the British came to India, at the time of the Battle of Buxar in 1764, India had 18.8% of the share of global GDP and England had 1.8%. When they left us in 1947, England had 18.5% of the global GDP and India had 1.2%. There had been a complete reversal. That is the level of poverty that we had come to. Out of that kind of material, we have created a great modern nation. The beauty of this nation is that it's a nation that embraces everybody. The great criticism of our nation today is that we lack sensitivity to see the big picture for everybody. I hope that changes. I mean, as a writer, as a journalist, I believe the world has great love, beauty, nature, and these are things that inspire us and these are things we should cleave towards. When I was talking about sexuality, I want to say I was reading Arathu's stories today. He had given me a copy and it's wonderful what he's been doing with them. And I hope there are more writers who keep emerging and these writers find national fame and international fame in terms of the way they are speaking. For myself, I have learned in my life that even as you fight for justice, even as you fight for the truth, both as a journalist and as a writer, there are 2 things that make life easy. And that's true for everybody. I think the 2 most important things in life are love and laughter. I think if you can have one of the 2, either love or laughter, you will always manage to get past all the problems of your life. If you're lucky enough to have both, then I can tell you, you have a great life. And for myself, I can say, I have a vast quantity of love and a vast quantity of laughter in my life, and most of my problems always seem small to me. Thank you, Shahrukh, for inviting me.